Subject of Greyhawk at conventions came up, and I'd like to talk about it today on Greyhawk Con. So the subject came up elsewhere that about the idea of Greyhawk being played at conventions, and I thought it was worth going through some of the highlights of it. There's, obviously, Living Greyhawk was an enormously influential thing for many, many years, and still remains beloved by a ton of Greyhawk fans. Um, and they were at conventions all over the place, and that really defined Greyhawk for a lot of people. It had its own thing, and there was hundreds of adventures written for it. So it's very influential. But of course, they shut it down eventually. And today we see Greyhawk coming in conventions in a couple of different ways. First, there's Greyhawk Reborn, which is a relatively local phenomenon here in the Northeast. They run at Mepicon and some game stores around here, and it's basically a living Greyhawk campaign. It's set in Kaoland, and it's basically the same thing that Living Greyhawk was doing. They would have adventures, and everything was they had a continuity, and things you got in one adventure at one convention applied to a following convention later on. So it had that level of continuity to it, just like Living Greyhawk. Now, there's also now a brandy new thing this year, Legends of Greyhawk. And this is another Living Greyhawk campaign that is running at a limited number of conventions, but it has the official sanction of Wizards of the Coast. So, they're getting a lot more publicity, they have a lot more support and so forth. But it's my I've not played in it, but it's my understanding that it's basically the same concept, is that, it's a living campaign, which means things that happen at one game in in one convention can apply to the character in another game at a different convention, which is the heart of it. So we're starting to see more of that, and I'm very sure that's tied to the World of Greyhawk being being the sample campaign in the new Dungeon Master's Guide. There's also Virtual Greyhawk Con, which is happening later this year in the fall. I'm going to be participating in a panel at that. We're running online games. They got panels. They got all kinds of stuff going on. It's really cool. Do check it out. Virtual Greyhawk Con. Just search for that and you'll find it. So there's a lot of stuff like that going around, but there's also the idea of Greyhawk just running a World of Greyhawk adventure at a convention. Not part of any living continuity, just a Greyhawk adventure. Alan Growe does this at North Texas. He'll run one of his Castle Greyhawk scenarios using 1E, I think. And so, it does happen. I've done it myself. I've run my Castle of Mount Archmage at conventions all the time. People love it. But the question becomes, does it matter if it's Greyhawk? If it's a one-shot adventure in a convention, does it matter what setting it's in? Right, because the stakes are going to be relatively limited. By definition, it's a one-shot adventure. So there's no real carry on. There's no real reverberation of your actions on the setting itself, unlike in a regular campaign, or for that matter, a living campaign. So I want to throw that out there as a question to the audience. Is this does it matter what setting? Like if I'm running a mega dungeon called Castle of Mount Archmage, or if I'm running Vault of the Drow or Tomb of Horrors or whatever, does it really matter if it's in Greyhawk versus Forgotten Realms? Because hell, they've taken so many Greyhawk things and put them into Forgotten Realms at this point. It's hard to tell whether it matters or not. But especially in a one-shot convention thing, I might argue that it really doesn't. That any game in a convention, we're talking about an RPG, is by definition a kind of in a vacuum, because there's no follow through. There's no connection to the larger campaign setting. And even in games that do depend on, the politics of the setting or whatever, like if you were playing Patriots of Ulick or whatever, which I reviewed not too long ago, it's clearly in Greyhawk and it's clearly tied to events that happened in the world of Greyhawk. But if you're at a convention, does it really matter? Couldn't it just be as easily Patriots of Sembia? Um, I I don't I tend to say it doesn't matter. It's fun because as a Greyhawk fan, I can, there's a couple Easter eggs in there for me as a Greyhawk fan, that would make me happy. But in the larger scheme of things, in the larger scheme of it being a an adventure in a game, in a convention, does it does it really matter for that game which setting it's in? Because it is in that vacuum, it is a one shot. I think it's an interesting question, and because remember some of those early adventures that, for example, Lost Caverns at SaltCon, that was famously a camp a tournament game for a convention before there was a World of Greyhawk published. Same thing with the Giants and the Drow series. Those were all um, tournament modules for conventions, but the World of Greyhawk had not yet been published, so nobody knew what setting it was in. It didn't matter. It was only later that it was published and put into the World of Greyhawk. Even if Gary, when he was writing them, had it in his mind that they were part of Greyhawk. And if you read the background of Lost Caverns, it does touch on some of the names, but they wouldn't have meant anything to anybody back then. So I'm just wondering, does that matter? Now, I also run my miniatures game, Swords of Battle, at conventions, and the games I run are tied to the World of Greyhawk. I run the Battle of Emerald Meadows. I'm going to be running another one next year, also set in Greyhawk. But it's a miniatures game, and what happens in that miniatures game won't have a real impact on what happens in the setting because it's a one shot again. It's like running Ogre. It doesn't, you're running it, you play a battle, you move on. There's no connection to, the geopolitical events of the Pan-European Union and the North American Combine. Same thing with my miniatures game. Isn't it cool? The figures all have shields and livery, painted up to match the colors of the countries. Yeah, that is cool, and that's one of those Easter eggs I talked about. For me as a fan, that matters. But if somebody comes in off the street, has never heard of the World of Greyhawk before, they come in, they play the game, they have fun, and they go back. To them, it doesn't matter that it's set in the World of Greyhawk because they're just interested in playing a game. They're not interested in the larger connection because it is a one shot. It is isolated. It is in its own, continuity, for lack of a better word. So I just wanted to raise that question. Please, sound off in the comments. I would love to hear people's thoughts on it. Is there any point to having a one-shot game, whether it's a miniatures game or a board game for that matter, or an RPG that is specifically tied to a setting other than fan service for fans of that setting? So let me know in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. I hope you're all having a wonderful, wonderful day, and I'll talk to you all later.
Thanks for watching today's video. Please remember to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Below you'll find links to my Patreon, which helps make these videos possible. You'll also find the web store where you can buy my books, and my blog where you'll find all sorts of free downloads and other articles. Thanks, and have a great day.